Welcome back to Late Night Lamentations. Good to see you here. Episode 1, Does God Feel Pain? The Wash. There are too many titles. I'm realizing that now. There's there's an arc, and then there's a sub, and then there's whatever. Anyway, I noticed, it's too late to go back, and why would you want to go back anyway? But I noticed that, the lighting in the last video, I shouldn't have used white lighting, so we're gonna try to orange, and maybe this will be a little bit better. I don't know what's better, white or orange. Probably orange. Anyway, let's just get into it, huh? Genesis chapter 6, verse 6. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. That word repented in Hebrew is naham, which means to regret, feel remorse, or to grieve. That's the first time we see the word used, and it's also the first time we see God tell us about a negative emotion that he himself expresses. Before this chapter, just to refresh your memory for those of you who are familiar with the book of Genesis, and maybe for those of you who aren't, God tells us that he created the following things, and he declared these things as good. And I want you to notice a couple of other things too, if you're following along in your Bibles at home. And I really encourage you to do so because, like I mentioned in the last one, the most important part about doing any of this is that you got to be involved in your own thinking. You can't just, I think, you can't just listen to some, I was going to say pasty white guy, but now it's pasty orange guy, stand up here and tell you about everything and then just go, okay. You gotta, what was that stuff we were talking about? It's all about choice, right? It's all about choice and you. Everything I'm talking about comes from my understanding, from what I'm deriving from the word, but you gotta get that too. Does that make any sense? I'm rambling again. Anyway, there's a man by the name of Myron Golden who, to save time, I'll just say is a multifaceted entrepreneur who has spent time in the ministry and uses biblical principles to discuss entrepreneurship and, a bunch of other stuff. But his stuff is in the description if you want to check him out. I don't want to spend too much time talking about him. But I don't know exactly what video or videos where he says this, probably because he says it in more than just one. But Myron makes the point that, isn't it interesting how God could have just said, I made A, B, C, and D in just a handful of verses, and then proceeded to move on with the story. But instead, we'll see verses like some of these coming up, particularly when it comes to how God describes the creation of man, that he as God, he makes time to really flesh out some of his processes, which is super cool to me, Also, keep in mind that the primary Hebrew word for man is Adam, which can refer to both Adam the individual or mankind as a whole. So we're not always going to be talking about man like he-man. Sometimes it's going to be man like we-man. Man? But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So back to where I was a few seconds ago. God created the following and describes these things as good. The dry land of the earth, the waters he calls the seas, the grass, trees, seeds, and fruit thereof, the sun, the moon, the seasons, and the stars, creatures on the land, in the sky, and within the waters. And it's important to see here too that when God creates the list I just mentioned, he uses very specific language. He says, let there be, and then that thing, be. Whether that's the light, the land, the sea, the creatures, or all of creation. Except when it comes to man. In the first instance of man being mentioned, it's Genesis 1:26, where I want you to notice two aspects that stick out to me when I take into account the rest of the Bible as a whole. Number one, he says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. God creates man as something separate from all other concepts and entities that he puts into existence, whether it be the earth itself, the creatures on the earth, the weather patterns that occur in the environment itself, the stars in the sky, and whatever else. Notice that there's a personal touch that he adds just for us. And not only does he create man differently, he puts man above that which he created on the earth. He creates man as an appendage of himself to have dominion over all that he later says he gifts to him to oversee and maintain. And number 2, did you catch the beginning of verse 26 where God is all of a sudden talking to himself? Like, this isn't a bad case of schizophrenia. This isn't God conversing with other angels or something like that. This is alluding to what will be revealed later in the Word as the Trinity. God exists as a triune being, meaning a 3-part being: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We could do an entire video about what a Trinity is, and maybe I want to sometime, but and what God says about, what each part of what they are and what they relate to as the whole, but that's not this video. And I just wanted to point that out because it's cool to me to find hints or specific mentions of Jesus in the Old Testament. And just in case, in the off chance that, maybe Christian out there, who may be preparing for a discussion with one of your Jewish neighbors, for example, regarding the validity of Jesus being God, keep verses like these in mind to help show them that Christ was always a part of the picture. Just as it says in the beginning of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. I just remember that other part in one of the Gospels where Jesus says, I am that I am. Well, no. If he says, that I am comes from Exodus. But I'm talking about, this is a ramble, but I thought about when he says, before Abraham was, I am. That's pretty cool. But anyway, in verse 27, we're back in Genesis. In verse 27, God says he created man in his own image. Then he says, God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish and of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. We don't just exist as the highest form of animal in a figurative food chain. We exist above and apart from that chain to do right by that chain and to maintain that chain. The end of the chapter in verse 31, God looks over at everything he's created so far, and now that man has been introduced and given his assignment, now it's being declared by the Creator that this is very good. And that's all in chapter 1. That's chapter 1 summed up to me. Very good. Chapter 2 gets into the point I mentioned earlier about how God likes to not only tell us what he did, but he likes to say how he did it. In this chapter, you'll see him go into greater details about the heavens and the earth that resemble the things we see in them today, as well as he describes the process of how man was created or why he was set apart from all other creation. This includes verse 7, where he'll talk about how God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. I don't see no living soul in these other things that have been mentioned. No living soul in the mountains, not the trees, the birds, and even as much as it hurts to say, as an animal lover myself, no soul in the dogs and the cats and the lizards and giraffes. It's just us. God paints for us this beautiful picture of creation. And towards the end of chapter 2, we get this really great description of why it wasn't just Adam in the garden at the beginning. It says he put Adam to sleep, and as he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh thereof. And the rib which the Lord had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam says, this is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. So shall she be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. I saw a video the other day while I was doom scrolling through YouTube shorts, where someone was talking about this section in particular, and I did my due diligence, or at least as much as I felt like or could do, to verify that the following was true. Or at least that it has sound logic to it. But the word in the original Hebrew for rib in most of our modern Bibles is selah. Selah can mean rib, but it's also used in building terms as a side or a portion or a half. God made man and woman to be two halves that complete each other. This is probably why that saying exists when people get married about finding their other half or their better half, or the whole he or she completes me thing that gets thrown around. And I don't know. I included it in here because I thought it was interesting and, a bit sweet. It shows to me that God always intended on men and women being partners that exist to coexist for a better outcome than they could ever hope for alone. And that checks out biblically to me due to verses like 2:18, like Genesis. I think we're back in Genesis 2:18. Where God says, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help, meet for him, or a companion." And that's it for chapter 2. I've debated on how much depth I need to go into here to define the emphasis I'm trying to shine on chapter 6, but I hope you're still with me that what I want you to take away from these first 2 chapters is that everything in the beginning was good and then very good. Positive descriptions of what has both been created and expressed from the Creator. When we get to chapter 3, we start to see a turn. This is where the serpent is introduced, being more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord hath made. The serpent says to the woman, she hasn't been named Eve just yet, that, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" And let's pause right there, since we didn't really cover that in our breakdown a moment ago when we were talking about the first 2 chapters. Let's go back and let's see what God said to Adam regarding eating of trees. Genesis 2:16 through 17 says, "God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree in the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." So no, serpent, God didn't say we couldn't eat of every tree. He said if we ate of one specific tree, then we would die. So it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots that if we don't eat of that tree, we don't have to worry about death. Also, I feel like it's easy to read a word like garden and think of this tiny like tomato garden that maybe your mom or your dad or your cousins, your aunts or uncles started when you were little, that we're trying to set up in the backyard near like a koi fish pond or something like that. I don't even know why. That's not even my experience. I've never seen a koi fish, but something I think we tend to glance over, or maybe is just a result of reading too fast through difficult wording, is how big Eden must have been. I'm not going to read these verses word for word because we got to do more here than just read the entire passages together. We could. I don't know how much time you got, but how I see Eden in my mind is this huge forest full of different trees and rivers and other ecosystems fit for the animals and the plants that have been created at this time. And that vision is guided by the descriptions that are listed throughout Genesis 1 and 2, specifically 2, 4 through 5, 8 through 14, and 19 and 20. If this is sounding like I'm making stretches here, go read it yourself. You don't have to agree with me. You're more than capable. I believe that much about whoever it is on the other side of the screen right now. And you go there and read it, and you think about what picture you see when those words are translated in your mind after, whatever that process is that I didn't need to put that much into with saying. Back to the snake. Can we get back to the snake? Yeah, we can get back to the snake. This is the first of many times we will see the devil twisting God's words in an attempt to confuse man. An attempt that has a pretty good ratio of working, except when we get to Jesus and his fight with temptations in the Gospels. And if you're curious about where that can be found, you can look to Matthew 4, 1 through 11, Mark 1, 12 and 13, and Luke 4, 1 through 13.
But why isn't it mentioned in John?
Isn't that a contradiction?
Doesn't that make it impossible to accept the gospel as truth?
I know I just made fun of you with that voice, with those voices, because I think it was more than one. Who's the schizophrenic one here? If you were thinking of saying words like those words to yourself or to your friends or something like that, but really, that's a great question. Like, really, that's another video addressing that. Happy to talk about it. Like, I'm actually very tempted to drop this whole series right now and get into that whole other thing. But we can't be jumping around that much, or this video would never end. But seriously, if you're asking those types of questions, you're in the right place. And not in the right place like this channel. I mean the right place in your walk with God. You just might not know it yet. Keep asking those types of questions or these types of questions. It's good for you to test and to think about what you're reading, no matter what book it is, particularly with one that claims to be not just true, but the truth. Anyway, so the devil tempts man with a twisting of God's actual words, and at first we give him some resistance. You know, the woman says to the serpent in verse 2 of Genesis 3 that we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. So, you know, she gets it mostly right. She added a little with the whole touching thing, but she mostly passes the first test of catching the first lie. The serpent then calls God a liar and states that ye shall not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And after the woman looks at the fruit again, deciding to believe the words of a snake over the creator who made this entire planet around her, including herself, takes a bite and seals the fate of humanity to one of damnation rather than eternal life with the one who loves them the most. A couple things here before you jump the gun again. Just sit back down in your chair for a second, okay? Number one, don't start carrying this idea around that if you were there, you would have done something different, okay? Maybe the non-believer out there has enough ego and arrogance to genuinely hold to that idea, just like how so many people you'll hear in life will say, well, I would never do X and Y because I'm a good person. Well, I'm so glad that you have so much confidence in whatever your definition of a good person is. You keep at that whole good person thing, and whenever someone points out an area where you haven't been one, just keep on justifying and ignoring it. I'm sure you're very satisfied with every single choice you've ever made, and that you have zero regrets for how you act sometimes, or how you react to other things in other times. And maybe that's too much. That feels like a lot. Anyway, what do I care? And believer, before I start pointing fingers too harshly and saying what I think that you are thinking, I'll instead point it at myself. Since I too, for a while, thought that if God had just put me in the game at the time, then we wouldn't have lost the championship. The thing that killed that idea for me was realizing that, well, after I accepted Christ as my personal Savior and recognized that it was my enablement of my own sinful nature that separated me from the love of God, which could only be restored by what was done by his son on the cross. You know, even after doing that, I still found days where I choose to sin when it felt right. I still have days to this day where I choose sin when it feels justified in my own mind. So maybe I wouldn't have fallen for that exact trap in that exact moment, but I would have fallen for my own version of whatever the forbidden fruit was. Because even after having such a running clock in this Christian race that I started before I really even knew what it entailed, there are times where I think I know better than God about what's happening around me and in front of me. There are still times where I feel like I need to have control over something that's too big for God to handle or too small for him to care. And for that, I have to let go of this idea that Adam and Eve were just stupid and accept that I'm more like them than I care to admit. The same goes with my view of the children of Israel as a whole, really, throughout the Old Testament. I'm sure you've been there where there are things that you read and you go,
Dude, God just came through for you a chapter or two earlier. How are you so small-minded that you're caught up in going against him again?
one good look in the mirror will show you exactly how something like that happens. You just have to look deeper than what's on your own surface. And last thing about this thing, I know I keep going into a lot of depth, but the man messes up too, okay? He could have stepped in at any time and backed up his wife instead of leaving her to debate with the deceiver on her own, which is what I think he should have done, like help her out. But he doesn't. He sees what she sees when the devil gets into their heads, and he makes the same choice. Also, and even more, like, let's go even further. Let's kill this idea that anyone should walk away from this section with a whole "we hate women" bumper sticker or t-shirt when God confronts us on our sin. You know, the very first thing that comes out of Adam's mouth isn't, "I'm so sorry, I have sinned, I need your forgiveness. I was tricked by the serpent and I lost sight of who you are, my God." No, in verse 12, go ahead and read it. Pull it up, Paulie, pull it up. Verse 12, what does he say? He says, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate," and I did eat. Sorry. Butchered it. But so men are terrible too, okay? Arguably more terrible. It's just, it's gross. Not only does he blame it on, does he place blame on his wife, but Adam also implies that this is actually God's fault for making the woman do what she did. As if she isn't a part of himself, being Adam. As if he didn't have control over his own actions. But notice too, how even in the midst of all this chaos, God doesn't react the way that we think he would, or maybe that you and I would. He doesn't get angry and throw fire down from heaven, to destroy humanity, which he has every right to do. I mean, given what we've read so far about that we are created by him and what he's put around us. Think about the things you create, whether they be sentient or not. I'm not just talking to parents out there. When they don't behave the way that you want them to, how do you typically feel? Do you lovingly accept the copier for smearing printer ink all over the place and making documents intelligible? It's unintelligible. Do you lovingly accept the copier for smearing printer ink all over the place and making the documents unintelligible? Or do you give it a good kick? Do you look at the car you've been driving around in for years that all of a sudden won't start on a cold morning and say, "Oh, it's okay, baby, you take all the time you need"? Or do you slam the car door muttering sailor soliloquies to yourself while you call up the mechanic? Do you look at the child you've brought into the world who just threw the remote into the TV you brought home for Christmas and feel rage bubbling up inside of you, ready to explode like a volcano? Or are you truly that different from everyone else on the planet? Am I projecting? There may be a bit of projection in a couple parts of this. I haven't decided if I want to keep it in because, honesty, or I don't know. Anyway, God doesn't get mad, or at least he doesn't say that he does. God makes short work of the serpent immediately following the confrontation between man and his sin, saying that because he has done this, he is cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field, and cuts his legs off and initiates a change in his diet. I think he tells him, you're going to eat dirt for the rest of your life, the remainder of his days on the earth, saying too that he will put enmity between the serpent and the woman, and between his seed and her seed, that it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And this points to the fact that Satan has this small victory of cursing man, as he set out to do, but it calls to the fact that a descendant of man will have the final say in the day of judgment, leading again to Jesus. Spoilers. But afterwards, God executes judgment, because he, in fact, is not a liar. Now man is confined to a finite lifespan. The work that he does on the earth becomes something that often feels like repetitive and difficult versus something that's rewarding and that brings satisfaction. Worst of all, though, man has to deal with a separation from God, because man chose to allow sin into his life, because man chose to believe that God wasn't enough for him. Then God gets into kicking man out of Eden and all that comes with the fall, but we'll pause there for right now. I want you to see that we're still only in chapter 3, and God still hasn't expressed a negative emotion. He just puts into practice the thing that he said would happen. He just held to the truth that he told man in the beginning. Whether you think his actions are justified or not after reading this chapter, that's not really relevant. It's undeniable that the text itself is at the very least saying that God does not lie. And I guess as we keep going and as you keep reading through the Bible, you'll see if that actually is consistent or not. I think it is. But, you're supposed to be reading. Chapter 4, things get worse. So when we get to chapter 4, by now you've got a pretty decent idea of the story so far, right? Cain and Abel are now born, Cain being the elder who tills and works the ground, while Abel, the younger, is a keeper of sheep or a shepherd. Time continues to pass, and it says, Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord, and Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and his offering he had no respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Why? That's a great question. But why what? Why did God not accept Cain's offering? God never really explains it outright. But this shouldn't be such a point of contention as it seems in my head and when I think about it, and probably when, way out there in the cosmos of the internet, I think we're tempted to think of things like, that doesn't seem fair. It's not like Cain did anything wrong by giving God the best of his stuff, just as Abel appears to have done the same. But who said Cain's offering was wrong? It just wasn't acceptable. Think about what the point of an offering is in the first place. Something you give to God to atone for your sins. Something you give to God to physically manifest the desire to please Him in your own way. Something you give that you think has significance to God to be seen as an acceptable exchange. You can point to the fact that the ground is cursed at this point due to the fall that was previously mentioned. You could say that because God defines the significance of blood later in Leviticus, that only a sacrifice of that substance would suffice as an offering. And you probably have more thoughts about why He didn't specifically accept the fruit of the ground at this time. But the fact that I see it is, the way I see the facts, is that God wasn't mad at Cain. God just had an idea of what an offering was supposed to look like, and the purpose behind it hadn't been revealed to anyone yet. This is so early in creation that this is the first offering as far as I can tell. So obviously there had to exist a singular moment in time where humans would be curious to know what actually was accepted and what was not accepted. And this is it. The summary I glean from this situation, and maybe one that you can walk away from with here too as well, is that a rejected offering does not necessarily mean a rejected person. And this leads into the second question of why did Cain get so angry when his offering was rejected, or wasn't accepted, I guess. This is something that even God asks Cain, saying in verses 6 and 7, that the Lord says unto Cain, "Why art thou wroth? Why are you mad? Why is your countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." Sometimes we try to do things, or maybe I shouldn't even throw we as much as I have in this script. I can just throw me, and then you can apply it to yourself if you want to. Now, I'm going to keep doing we, because it's already in there. But that's a future thought. Future Justin, you think about that when you're writing the next ones. Sometimes we try to do things for God, and when the results don't look like what we anticipate, it's easy to throw our hands up like,
What?
It's not about Abel equals good and Cain equals bad. These just weren't policies, there just weren't policies and procedures set in place for what was and wasn't acceptable in the eyes of God. The whole point of the offering was not only to give something significant, but to find out exactly what is significant for Him that man is able to give Him for something like sins. The actions that you do for God aren't always wrong. Sometimes they're just not what He's asking of you. Sometimes they're not only right actions, but they actually are what He's asking from you. But the reward you expect for doing it just isn't, you're doing them. It just isn't what it actually, doesn't turn out to be what actually comes from those actions. The work that you put in when seeking after God is only worthless if you've decided within yourself about what the reward should be before seeing the actual reward yourself. Does that make sense? Cain could have trusted that God loved him just as much as his brother. He could have trusted that God has a plan and knows more than Cain does, and that a rejecting of offering was not a rejection of being. Probably could have done a lot of things differently, but that's really only fair to say in hindsight. That kind of speaks to the beauty of the realistic nature of what the Bible represents. We don't get stories that showcase perfect people acting in just the right way, save one, Jesus Christ. What is instead inscribed on these pages are imperfect people acting just as human as you and I would in any given situation. For the most part. Probably for the all part. Save Jesus Christ. I already said that. Anyway. He could have done 1,000 other things to avoid getting his diaper in a bunch, but he doesn't. He catches an attitude and ultimately kills his brother due to his jealousy. See verse 8. Continuing on to verse 9, though, we see the confrontation between Cain and God. And the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? There's that catching the attitude. Like, there's that attitude that I mentioned earlier. Think of the state of the world at this time. It isn't like today where there have been like a ton of time. Like, there's been a huge passage of time between major events in history. This has just got to be like a handful or more of years since Adam and Eve first sinned against God. You know, maybe a decade or maybe a decade and a half, maybe 2 or something. But and that's speculation. Hey, speculation. It's not in there. There aren't hundreds of people that Cain has been influenced by to lead to his decision making. There's just him and his brother, mom and dad, the serpent and God, and other living creatures, if you really need me to say that too, or mention that. There's probably more to dig into there. But anyway, God doesn't ask this question of where is bro, because he doesn't know the answer. It's kind of like when a parent finds out something about something about their kid and gives them a chance, something bad that like their kid did and gives them a chance to not make things worse. You know, did you break it? When pointing to the broken plate in the kitchen while the child ties their hands in knots behind their back and cookie crumbs litter the ground around them beside pieces of shattered porcelain. He's trying to give Cain an opportunity to be honest in the face of impending consequences. It's actually a parallel to earlier in chapter 3 when God asks Adam, Adam, where art thou? Well, he just asks it, I guess, to the air. He doesn't ask him, Adam, where are you? Well, I guess, I don't know. Or who told you that you were naked? That's another question that he asks. Or what is this that you have done? He isn't asking because he doesn't know the answer to those questions. He's asking to give us a chance to come clean and ask for forgiveness. When Cain doesn't fess up, God paints for us a harrowing image. He says, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shall thou be in the earth. Cain complains that the punishment is too great, which is kind of funny to me because I started thinking about who are you to say what justice is and what isn't. There's been like 4 people on the earth so far. Everything you have comes from God. Like, look at his ego and pride here. But like, it's easy for me to think that about Cain, but then I think about times in my life where I've said, this isn't fair. What could I have done to deserve this? Or that's not right. Look at what that person has done. And then look at me, you know? And again, I see myself in Cain. Still, God, he still makes it easier for him. Like, you guys realize he doesn't have to do, anyway, I got it. He still makes it easier for him by giving him a mark and announcing in the next few verses later, essentially, whoever kills Cain gets hit with vengeance 7-fold. And then the chapter wraps up with a bit about how Cain and goes on to start his own kingdom and finishes back with Adam having another son, Seth, who will carry on his line. And chapter 5 is easy to gloss over. You know, it's 32 verses that span over about 8,000 years. The significance here doesn't seem like much at this point, aside from context regarding the passage of time. But I like chapters like this in the Bible, though, personally. I know it's going to sound weird and probably made up. It's not made up, right?
Shut up.
I think about how everything in here, and I think I was supposed to, yeah. I think about how everything in here has been preserved for so long, that every verse has a purpose. If you believe that the Bible is not only true, but it's the truth that God has given us as humans, that means that there isn't any fluff or filler or anything like that that doesn't need to be in there. I think this first rendition of Generations in chapter 5, right? Yeah, in chapter 5, is to stress the importance of how Christ fits into the picture later. And you can see Matthew for something like that. But it's probably why in later books of the Old Testament, they'll do this again. To keep us as the reader thinking not only about what's happening in that particular book and scenario or chapter and situation, but where this whole thing is going. And it's really cool that it's at the beginning in the first book that this starts happening because for reasons that are important that I won't get into. What I just said is cool. But chapter 6, we made it. Chapter 6 opens up with A breakdown of where humanity is at so far. It doesn't specifically say how much time has passed, but as I just said a second ago, you read and you add up the numbers in chapter 5, and you'll get around 8,000 years, unless I've, really fallen off that hard in math, but I don't know. Men begin to multiply and expand, and God mentions that his spirit will not always strive with man. God describes that the men who have come to be by this time are renowned, meaning popular, respected, among others, great men of old, essentially. Verse 5 says that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So think about what we know so far. I know this has been a long video, but think about what we know so far. God establishes and defines good, right? God gives man autonomy, or the ability to choose how to live rather than being pre-programmed robots. God delivers justice and judgment without reproach, and God does not lie. Where are you? There you are. Sorry, the eyes were going crazy. Given the last point alone, we can trust what he says about the wickedness of men. We can trust what he says about the wickedness of man. And it repented the Lord that he had made men on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. We've made it. We have made it to the verse that I want you to, we've made it to the verse, right? I want you to think about what God has said about his own experience up to this point. It's gonna feel similar to the, handful of lists I just did a second ago, but it's a bit different. Hold on tight. He creates the world and the things within it. This is God's experience, right? He creates the world and the things within it. He creates the heavens and holds them in his hand. He creates man in his image and gives him a piece of himself by way of his spirit. He watches men choose the creation over the creator. He watches the very thing he once declared as very good, above all that good stuff he already made, turn 180 degrees in the other direction. He tells us about the pain these things have caused him to feel, and he promises that there is a way to redemption. What did God do wrong to deserve the pain that we've put him through as humans? At least at this point in the story. Like, this is the first episode, so it's gonna feel like I'm really beating us over the head. I'm just reading what it says. But what did he do, man? What did he do wrong? Tell me what he did wrong. Where was his mistake, if one can even be found? Did he make a mistake by creating man? Was it in giving man free will to choose the love of God instead of being forced to participate in it? What do you think? You don't even have to tell me. Just what do you think? Who am I? You don't have to tell me nothing. Verse 7, the Lord says he will destroy man whom he has made from the face of the earth. And not just man, but all creatures above the sea. For it repenteth him that he had made them. Let's jump back to verse 3 for a moment in this chapter. The bit about my spirit will not always strive with man. What does that mean? It's interesting that the word strive in the KJV is translated from the Hebrew word yadam, and could mean one of two things: either stay, as in to abide or remain with, or it could mean argue or struggle with. So God is saying that he's witnessed what man has done and all that they seek after, and that by and large is bad, is evil. We've already discussed how he is able to make that claim, and that he delivers justice at the end of the day when forced with that which contradicts good or holy or set apart or God. His patience has a limit in terms of being made a mockery through sin. This is a loving God, as we'll get into probably in this series, but really in the second one that comes after it. He's a loving God, but he's not a joke. Oh, this is going to be so much fun to talk to you about. I'm getting off again. I get off track again. Let's keep going. We're almost done. But, I told you. Did I tell you I get amped up? I told you. I tell you. Where were we at? What were we saying? Boop, boop, boop. His patience has a limit in terms of being made a mockery through sin. I think that has a temptation to scare us, but really this should be something we take comfort in. Hold on now. Evil has its day in the sun, but God will always do what's right according to his will and his timing. Has someone ever tried to hurt you in the past, or actually hurt you in the past? Has someone chosen to abuse or take advantage of the goodness you strive to give to them? Does it ever feel like clear and present evil gets away with whatever it wants to? God knows. God sees. God has a way and a plan to execute justice with his judgment. It might not happen the way that you want it to. It may not happen in the timing you want it to, but your perspective and mine is limited. He exists outside of yours and mine personal experience to bring true justice where necessary. Good always triumphs over evil. You don't know everything that you think you know about that evil person that came into your head when I started talking about, has anyone hurt you in the past? Maybe you know a lot, but you weren't there. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't know everything. I think you can even, like, can I disarm you a little bit here and myself? Because I watch these too. Conceited? No. Like, you don't know everything. Even when you think you do. You don't even know everything about yourself. And you think you do. He exists outside of your personal experience to bring true justice where necessary. Good always triumphs over evil. The temptation to be scared comes from a misunderstanding of God's grace. Continue into the same verse where he mentions that his day, quote, his days shall be numbered 120 years. Wait, I said quote, so I have to, I just had it though. What verse are we on? What are we doing? Are we in verse 3? Have I said? I wrote numbers here, and I don't know if it's numbers or numbered. And I don't want to lie to you. I won't lie to you now. Where are we? Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Didn't I just say verse what? The same verse. I went on such a tangent. Why is the video so long? Because I'm not cutting any of this out, man. This is what it's all about. What verse was I specifically talking about? Verse 3, thank you. We're still in chapter 6, right? Yes. Aha! His days shall be 120 years. So I guess, where was I talking from? Oh, I guess I was paraphrasing that by saying his days shall be numbered 120 years. Sorry, dude. I'm telling you, I'm taking this seriously. I told you. I know there's a lot of jokes and there's like, but whatever, this is important to me, and it's fun. It's fun. What does that mean, that 120 years number? Well, scholars debate on this topic a lot too. So I'm not going to be able to give you something that you're going to be like, oh, okay, he's got the answer. Nope, don't got it. But some say that 120 refers to a reduced lifespan in humans after the flood, though that doesn't 100% line up, because if you continue to read through this book and a few of the other ones in the Old Testament, some people do live longer than 120. It's more likely that God is referring to the time between the announcement of judgment and its execution, being the flood. Either way, notice that God gives time for those who want to turn to him to get back there. Verse 8, and we're done, folks. That's a lie. I think there's probably 2 more pages. I wrote in that we're done, but we won't be done. This is so important. Look at verse 8, though. Let me look at verse 8 with you, huh? Let's do this together instead of me just reading. Oh, verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. I don't want you to miss this. The wickedness of man is seen, but the righteousness of man does not go unnoticed either. God reaches out to Noah, warning him about the flood coming and giving him everything he needs to prepare his family to safely weather the coming storm. And you may be asking yourself at this point, why only Noah? Why doesn't God tell everybody? Well, that's not explicitly stated either. But I think of 2 thoughts to answer that question that I have myself too. You see, when I do these voices, I'm not just making fun of you. I'm making fun of me! No. Number 1, God just said before this that man was exceedingly wicked. It's of their own choices and decisions and volition to behave this way. It's in giving into the lusts of their flesh to be gods to themselves, rather than to give back to the one who put them there in the first place. Number 2, it's like, if the 120 years is in fact the time in between the announcement and the arrival of judgment, it's not like they couldn't have asked Noah what he was doing during the time of building the ark. It's not like you wouldn't have noticed some dude building something as crazy as the ark in his backyard, if it even fit in his backyard. And I don't think that it's portrayed as God telling Noah a secret. I think he told the only one who would have cared enough to listen. And everyone else at that time was so caught up in their own ego and their own stuff that they ignored the signs around them, be that of visual signs or of what Noah may have said in warning. It's probably not even ignoring the signs. They probably just didn't care. They just didn't believe him, and they didn't care. Again, this is just speculation though, okay? That's not in there. It is not in there. So this is one of those things where you'll have to wrestle with yourself as far as, I can't believe that, or I can believe that. I'm not here to prove anything, really. Just state my interpretation of what's been written. To give you an idea of how big the ark was, there is actual verses in here that talk about, the building of it. And I think for the majority, they were used to build the replica. There's this place in Kentucky where people actually built a life-size replica that you can walk through, and I've been there a couple of times in my Christian youth, and it was cool to do that, But anyway, I'll leave a link to it too if you want to look at it. I think it's called Ark Encounter or something. This would have taken a long time without modern tools, and it probably still took a long time with modern technology. And anyone watching the most righteous man in town, because that they knew when someone is if someone's the most righteous man in town, they're different than the people around them. Doesn't mean that they're like better people, I guess, but they're different. Does the different make them better? Well, it helped a lot here, but I don't know. Then you might start asking yourself, what does it mean to be righteous? Another great question. I didn't put it in here, but I've thought about that too. It's not in here. I can't tell you, because if I tell you, then I have to research it so I can make it, sound like I'm not just talking out of my head. Oh man. Anyone watching the most righteous man in town doing this would have had every opportunity to ask him why. And I don't think it would be very graceful in God's eyes if Noah wouldn't have been willing to give them an honest answer. When I think about respected men or men of renown, as it mentions too, earlier in the passage, I think of modern people in high levels of status. Do you think someone like or would have taken Noah seriously enough to even ask him about what he was doing when they're always preoccupied with the next big thing that will make their own renown increase? I'm not sure. And I'm not trying to judge the two men that I've just listed. I'm just thinking, I suppose. I think that's it though. I think that's the end of the first episode. I hope this isn't too long to be able to digest in one sitting, but 50 minutes, it probably is. The points I tried to illustrate throughout this episode were these in summary. God recognizes the evil that man decides to take part in, and with him being the definition of good, cannot abide by it. God promises to execute judgment according to his goodness, meaning evil has and always will lose. God gives grace to those who seek after it, and always provides a way out of that judgment, because God sees both sides of man. He sees the good and the bad, and knows how hard it is to choose one over the other sometimes. He's the one who set the rules. He doesn't have to be this way, but he chooses to because he chooses to love over hate. God has every reason, in my opinion, to hate us. And not only does he not partake in that emotion, he leans heavy into love. And that's where we're stopped today. Not because that's where the story ends, but because this is where the pain first speaks. Thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of this. I had a lot of fun. Did you have fun watching me? I had a lot of fun doing this. I'll see you next week. What do we got next week? I don't have the list in front of me. Is it the Samuel verse? No, that doesn't make any sense. There's got to be. No, it's the Judges verse. Dude, Judges is crazy. Yeah. Next week's gonna be nuts. Okay. All right. I'll see you then. Hope you're doing all right. And Yeah. I love you. See ya.